Today on Indoctrination, I speak with Karen Feldman, a former educator in New York City Public Schools who started her own organization, the New York City Public Schools Alliance, to come together with parents to fight anti-Semitism that is systemic in the school system. Hear about her role in galvanizing parents to actually the school board, the superintendents, the chancellor, and even the mayor to fight this issue in New York City. Welcome to Indoctrination, the podcast that exposes and opposes radical ideology in K-12 schools and academia. Each episode, I talk with parents, students, and educators fighting for change. I'm Josh Weiner, your host. Join me and my guests as we shine a light on what's actually happening in K-12 classrooms and what we can do about it. Hey everyone, I'm here on Indoctrination this week with Karen Feldman. Karen is a former teacher in New York City Public Schools, and I'm very excited to speak with her because she's been doing a ton of work to combat rampant anti-Semitism in the school system across New York City. Karen, welcome.
Thank you, Josh. It's really good to be here with you, and I really appreciate the invite and an opportunity to talk about my experience and my work in this field.
No, I mean, really appreciative to have the opportunity to speak with you. So, Karen, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about you? When did you start working at New York City Public Schools? What got you into public schools? And what did you teach?
Okay, I'll give you a brief synopsis of my background. So I am a born and bred New Yorker, proud Jewish New Yorker. I am also a very, very proud grandchild of Holocaust survivors. And from a young age, of course, I grew up with the stories of survival, stories of pre-war, during the war, and then, picking up the pieces after the war. And as a young girl, it just impacted me greatly. And I revolved my whole life around learning about this time period, learning a deep history of anti-Semitism, a European history, a Jewish history within Europe, and also how society is impacted by the different whether it's the different aspects of economics and politics and money and religion and culture, and really trying to understand how a society, a whole continent can, or majority of them can get behind a murderous plan.
Kind of like the socio-cultural aspects that lead to it, which is really important to understand, especially right now.
100%. It is so relevant. A lot of similarities and parallels, but differences as well. And I'm sure we'll dive into that. But so, like I said, I really revolved my life around learning about the Holocaust and the Jewish experience in Europe and in the diaspora. And when I graduated college, I went to NYU for undergrad and grad school, majoring in Jewish studies and education. I really thought I was going to go into museum work. And in fact, I started my first professional experiences as an intern at the Museum of Jewish Heritage down in Battery Park City that had just opened up, and just really excited for this. When I started at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, I was really hopeful that Holocaust education, which was recently mandated, I started in 1997 at the museum, and New York State had just mandated in 1994 Holocaust education. And when I graduated, I actually was approached by an assistant principal at that time to the largest middle school in Manhattan, Robert Wagner, on the Upper East Side. And Robert Wagner consists of grades 6th, 7th, and 8th. So I was asked to come on board and design a Holocaust unit that they would be able to use in the school. And um, I was so eager and excited to have this opportunity and jump right into the classroom, which was a whirlwind as a 22-year-old teacher jumping into a classroom, a beautifully diverse classrooms. I taught 5 classes a day, approximately at that time, 33 kids in each class. And I taught a split schedule, 7th and 8th grade, American history. So, and throughout my beginning years, I would work um, diligently on creating a Holocaust unit and weaving it into American history in grade 7th and 8th. And for close to 25 plus years, I proudly taught that curriculum until I recently made the decision to resign from the system, really looking at what was happening in the world of education, specifically in New York City, and kind of um, thinking about is Holocaust education the answer right now, and the how to teach Holocaust, really resonated in my mind. Watching other teachers uh, take on this topic with a lack of expertise and different biases kind of broke my heart and discouraged me through the last couple of years. And my efforts have now been really focused on research how our system has become infiltrated with um, bias and propaganda and the teaching within the oppressor and oppressed narrative. How has that really aided in our deterioration of our education system? So, yeah.
So it's really interesting because your job essentially is to make sure that the conditions that led to the Holocaust don't happen again through understanding, through education, through making sure that kids really grasp those concepts. Yet things have changed in a way where I think, right, like you've alluded to it a bit, that it's not being taught in that right way. That's not to say that what you accomplished or what you did or what programming you put together was wrong or invalid. So talk to me a little bit about like what were the strengths of your program? Did you get, positive feedback from students that you had taught over the years? And how has that impacted you relative to how things have changed?
So 100% in the regard to during my profession in teaching Holocaust education to the grade 7th and 8th, thousands of students, it was the best time in my career. So over the years, during my time at Wagner and teaching 7th and 8th grade, there were numerous examples and experiences of such positive impacts teaching the Holocaust. And I know that for the thousands of students that have entered and went through my classroom, it was a very educational and eye-opening and positive experience. For example, I had 1 year, actually right before COVID, every year in my school, I would bring in survivors to speak to the students. And one survivor in particular, William Bernheim, we called him Willie, who was a close friend of our family and part of my community, and just an exceptional human being and someone who had the most crazy experiences, and really every survivor's story was a miracle. And he would come into school and speak to approximately 500 kids at a time, and it was pretty extraordinary. And one student of mine, Theo, whose family is from Poland, I believe Lodz, and his grandparents still live in Poland. Grew up in the he grew up in the United States, and in my class, he, really was intrigued by Willie's story, and it encouraged him not only to learn about the history of what was happening as within the Polish perspective during that time, and asking questions to his own family, but he became very close with Willie, and they became pen pals. And the mom and family still keep in touch with me today. And it's, it had an impact on him that will last forever. And that's just one of so many students' experiences with them learning about the Holocaust in my classroom. And I took great pride, and Holocaust education is needed today. It is, but we really have to look at, the how-to of Holocaust education. We need to understand that we can't focus just on that time period, that we need to have a lot of deep diving discussions on the before and, of course, on the after. And Holocaust education, and this is, definitely something that we could have a whole podcast on, unfortunately has taken a scary twist and turn in recent years, where there is that, twisted history happening. And with the discussion of more classrooms, having that push for Holocaust education without those educators being properly trained, a lot of educators I'm witnessing are somehow drawing sick parallels to the monstrous acts of the Nazi regime and the IDF today. So, which, is a complete distortion of history and of current events.
So like, let's talk about how we got there a little bit, because you told me in our conversation prepping for this that you sort of experienced this really big change in the education system around 2018 into 2022. I think it's really important for our listeners and viewers too to understand that it seems from the outside that a lot of this started on October 7th, 23, but a lot of us know it was going on for a long time. So what was changing in the schools then? And maybe weave in how Holocaust education started to change a little bit when you're speaking about that.
Definitely. So when I started to see really these shifts in education was in 2018. I'm a documenter. I save emails. I document things that kind of, rub me a little weird, or might have a yellow flag, an orange flag, and definitely a red flag. And I like to go back through my files, and I started to see the change in 2018, but I also, going back in through my research, realized that principal emails and staff emails started to change in respects to teacher workshops as early as 2017, a year before. But in 2018, I received an email from my school, and I'm going to read it to you because I think that this really is eye-opening. And it says, "Dear Wagner staff, this week, the Wagner Equity Team will be facilitating the first racial affinity group of our monthly PD series, Professional Development Series. Racial affinity groups are spaces where people can practice talking about race, a space in which we can be honest, ask possibly ignorant questions, and process our deep emotions around race, while also challenging ourselves to do better and to examine our experiences more critically. If you are a person who identifies as racially white, we would like to invite you to join your PD group in your established schedule rooms. If you are a person who identifies as racially non-white, we would like to invite you to the library. Any questions, please feel free to reach out. This email is dated 11/25/2018.
So wait, it's a binary of identifying as white and non-white. There was no like additional.
No, there was no additional groups in the beginning. That would change. So when I first got this email, I wasn't alone in this thought, but clearly my first thought that went through my mind was, oh my gosh, this is the New York City public school system. Is this allowed? Right? That was the first thought, right? I mean,
Certainly, if it was students, it wouldn't be. But like for teachers, it's a question, right?
right. I mean, here we are being divided up by racially white and racially non-white. And then the second thought was, where do I fit in to this? Right. And some people would laugh by looking at me and be like, oh, you know what I mean? She's white. Right. But knowing my background and knowing that my grandparents were in the camps and narrowly escaped the gas chambers and were racially, identifiable the same as myself, but not considered to be the same as the Germans or the rest of the European whites, right? We were racially inferior. And I had a really hard time with this. And I went up to the equity leader, who is our guidance counselor, one of the guidance counselors for numerous years, and at that time considered her a close colleague of mine. And I said to her, this seems really off. I don't know where to go. And she like chuckled at me and said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, clearly I'm white, but I'm Jewish. And in the 20s and 30s and 40s, I wasn't deemed, racially white. And she said, well, Karen, you need to look at it as the following. And she posed a question to me and she said, do you get stopped when you're driving in the car by police? And I said to her, if I am doing something illegal. And she says, do you get stopped if you're not doing something illegal? I said, no. She says, well, look at it that way. And I realized at that moment that this conversation wasn't going anywhere, that she was not understanding, what I was saying. And this is someone who now all of a sudden from the New York City public school system has become an equity leader. So, and we could talk about how.
Yeah. So when did just like quickly, like when did the equity leader become a thing and how did that fit into the organization?
So equity is, or it was labeled equity, is DEI, was the mutation of, critical race theory, CRT. And during this time period, I want to say maybe even as early as from 2014 to 2016, this was evolving in the schools. And at that time, I really didn't take much notice of it. Most teachers are in their classroom, they're focusing on their curriculum, their student issues.
I think the timing's interesting because just like social context, the iPhone and social media really started blowing up together in 2014, and Michael Brown was the first the first, I guess, like racially charged murder by the police that was really broadcast through the iPhone and social media in 2014. So I don't think an accident that this is the timing.
Right. Right. I mean, that's really an interesting point. Definitely. And at that time, I don't think most people realized, right, what was or how this was impacting the K through 12 space. And, for myself, I was following college campus anti-Semitism as early as 2004, and seeing the growth and evolution of BDS on those campuses, and starting to see by 2018, definitely a lot of those trends entering the K through 12 space, especially through staff conversations. But so equity, getting back to the equity leadership, the DOE often offers a lot of summer programs and different ways that teachers could be team leaders.
The New York City DOE, just so people know. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, the New York City DOE, and our union, the UFT. And there's often, we have a lot of professional development workshops and work time. And I've always appreciated that because it's important when you're a teacher and to advance your knowledge. But it could also be used as a weapon, right? To weaponize education. And that's what has happened over the course of the years. So during this time period, there was a program where teachers can sign up to become equity leaders. And, don't quote me, but, it was like a week-long program and run by different organizations and the New York City public school system, where once the teachers went through this workshop, they were, experts in equity, and the materials that were used during those workshops were materials that today we have tracked, like the Zinn Education Project, Rethinking Schools, or facilitators and books by Goldie Muhammad or Bettina Love, who are teaching or speaking within this oppressor and oppressed narrative, right? This framework. And those equity experts now that went through this week-long program then turnkey the information to their school staff, right? So this is the progression of the equity teams in the New York City public school system. Now, we are the largest school system in the nation, 1.1 million students, and a massive staff, over 100,000 New York City public school staff members and employees. So it might look different. It does look different in different schools, but the framework is pretty much the same. So these equity leaders would turnkey these workshops. And from 2018, from that first email that I read to you, till today, the equity meetups or professional development became more and more frequent. So at first it was once a month, and then it became twice a month. Then it became weekly. And then it became, twice a week. So now it looks.
So I have a question though. Who's driving this? Because, and you could help me a little bit with this, but like typically across America, public schools are very community oriented in that the community elects a school board, that school board hires a superintendent, the superintendent runs the district. In New York City, it's a bit different, right? It's a little bit more top down. The mayor elects a chancellor, the chancellor has a board, the board represents community districts, I believe. So help me with that if I got any of that wrong, but Bill de Blasio was mayor at this time, right? So does that policy come from the top down? Is it coming from exterior factors putting pressure on that political system? Where's it coming from?
I think it's coming from all over. But within the DOE, you are right. It is a top-down system. But with that being said, there's a lot of room in the middle of the tiers for, professional expertise and choice and creativity. So you have the chancellor, you have the DOE leadership, and within that DOE leadership, they oversee different aspects of the system, whether it's curriculum, whether it's safety, whether it's DEI and or family outreach, school boards. So, and then from there, you have the superintendents, and the superintendents, take care of a bunch of schools within that district. And then you have the principal and their leadership within each school. And like I said, within the tiers, there's room for professional expertise and choice. So, for example, a superintendent might oversee many principals, and each school, the principal has a certain amount of discretion on how they want to run their school, right? But there are certain protocols and regulations and musts that everyone must follow, right? So again, equity looks a little different from school to school, but I think this is a great opportunity for me to explain a little bit about what I've been working on post October 7th that overlaps to the hierarchy and the lack of protocols or the problematic aspects of how different parts of the system are being run.
Yeah, so you mentioned like a lot of this ended up leading to, or it was aligned or running parallel to a lot of anti-Semitic incidents that were happening, and you talked a little bit about, I guess, the lack of attention to those issues, and then talk about what your response was, and if you could tell us about your group, the New York City Public Schools Alliance, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. So from 2018 to right before October 7th, I was actively documenting this rise in anti-Semitism within my school. And right away, I mean, I saw it first with staff conversations, like I said earlier, especially when the mention of Israel came about, and even this lack of care anymore to focus on Holocaust education. At that time, I was the only one teaching about the Holocaust as I'm still the only teacher who taught the Holocaust as a unit. Other ELA teachers taught Anne Frank and Knight and so forth. But at that time, I was the only one really addressing the Holocaust, even in the social studies department. And I quickly saw the tone change in that focus on the importance of Holocaust education and discussing anti-Semitism. And with that, I would see in my classroom, I mean, anti-Semitism always existed. You always had students or even adults that either said something or drew a swastika. And, my school normally handled it pretty appropriately. But during this time period, I'm not sure if I saw more anti-Semitic incidents happening at first, or it was because of the lack of protocols or the lack of proper consequences that were, not being dealt with when incidents of anti-Semitism arose, right? Which came first?
So there was like a change, right? Like they used to deal with these in what seemed like an appropriate manner, but then they became maybe not dealing with them the same way as other types of incidents.
Correct. Correct. So I started documenting this, and then, finding out that the protocols of reporting discrimination, especially whether it's racism or anti-Semitism, were not being handled the same, and the administration and the deans who were responsible for logging the incidents of discrimination weren't logging incidents of anti-Semitism or Jew hate as biased incidents, which essentially, when the dean puts it in the system, in the computer system, if it's logged in as a biased incident, it then goes up to the highest level tier, and then an investigation is supposed to start. But when it came to incidents of anti-Semitism, whether it was reported by staff or students, they were often logged as non-bias incidents, and then they just stayed at the school level, and there was really no action, taken for that. So after October 7th, right after, I knew that things in my school first were going to go haywire, which they did. And then we started to see the whole system kind of going haywire. And at that time, the chancellor, on October 11th, Chancellor David Banks sent out a mass email addressing the situation in Israel and Gaza, and even the verbiage of that email was really wasn't kind of insinuated that this was between Israel and Palestine, rather than an act on humanity. Right? It already framed the terrorist act as a conflict rather than an act on humanity. And this email offered many different resources for teachers to use in their classrooms, with no guidance on how to use the resources. And it offered, I think it was 35 links to resources. That's what it was. It was just links. And out of the 35 links, 28 links to those resources were extremely biased and problematic. Okay. For example, Al Jazeera was first on that list, followed by Amnesty International, followed by Brown's Choices curriculum, followed by the Zinn Education Project, Rethinking Schools. I mean, all the heavy hitters that today so many of us have linked these organizations, educational resources, to terror-funded groups.
I just want to solidify this a bit, because Al Jazeera is Qatari state-funded media. It even says that, I think, on YouTube now when you watch Al Jazeera videos. A lot of these educational resources, they go by the idea that racism is prejudice plus power. And then you have this situation where Jews or anyone who's perceived as part of the white supremacy or adjacent to white people, they have power, so they're the only ones who really can be racist. So you automatically then, if you're trying to frame a conflict like Israel versus Gaza, and then you make it about Israel and Palestine, you kind of have Israel has all the power, so there can't possibly be oppression coming from within Palestinian society. It has to be just a power dynamic between Israel and Gazans. So just anything you disagree with there. Yeah.
You are 100% on the mark. So right away, at that time, I reached out to the social studies department, the chancellor, the mayor's office. And the mayor's office responded right away, said, we're on it. We're going to see it, and try to get it pulled. It took them 3 weeks to pull Al Jazeera. So in that time, it was a live doc. And I would go on it multiple times a day, and you would see tons of teachers on it, all the little colored dots. And I was just, boiling, knowing that these teachers, okay, trusted the DOE to put out resources to help them have these hard conversations in class. And they're pulling resources from these terror-funded organizations or extremely biased organizations. And then on the bottom, by the way, the last couple of resources was like Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and the Museum of Jewish Heritage. So any valid link was Holocaust education, right? And it was like, that's the only credible sources within this whole Jewish world that we could pull from. And it's about the Holocaust, not even about.
Important context too, before October 7th, the individuals or the groups who were on the Free Palestine side of things or sides of things were already calling what was happening in Gaza and Judea and Samaria genocide. So it's just an interesting thing to think about when the only sort of pro-Jewish or pro-Israeli side of things, or I would say not anti-Israeli side of things, is coming from the Holocaust education.
Right, definitely. So I couldn't agree more. It's where our terms, genocide, the Holocaust, diaspora, occupation. I mean, it's been hijacked and manipulated to mean other things and for apartheid, to frame us as the oppressor. So my first reaction to that email and the links was the fact that right off the bat, they handled it wrong. Instead of focusing on, crimes against humanity, focusing on like, in no case should rape, burning, beheading, kidnapping ever be acceptable, right? It was framed as this conflict, this oppressor and oppressed narrative. And then this mutation of our narrative into committing genocide. So we had this happen, and very quickly, what we see is this rise, this uptick of Jew hate in the New York City public schools and within New York City communities, and nationwide.
There's a famous video of a riot at Hillcrest High School. Can you talk about that?
So Hillcrest High School happens in November, and essentially Hillcrest is a very large high school. There was a teacher who posted a picture on her personal social media with a sign that says, "I stand with Israel," from the march. I believe it was at the march in Washington after October 7th. And students got hold of this photo from her personal a social media account. And very quickly, there was a mob of over 400 kids formed in order to meet at her classroom. And I mean, there were vile, comments on the posts gathering these students and saying we need to get her out of the school. Really, really scary threats being made. And sure enough, the students marched through the school, rioted through the school, went to her classroom. She was given a heads up earlier that day, and actually at that time was thankfully in the principal's office filling out an incident report because this was going around the students' social media to meet in front of her classroom, and it was a real mess. And it was a scary, scary situation.
I mean,
After
400 students. Can you imagine being a
400
teacher?
students. Yeah.
And 400 students are basically calling for your head, like get this person out of the school for being a Zionist or being just, I think, present at the March on Washington for Jewish civil rights, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah.
Correct. And there's videos of this mob, marching or, stampeding, really. Marching is a polite word.
Would be generous.
Stampeding to her classroom. I mean, really out of control. So it also brings into the conversation safety in the school. Where's the security guards? Proper protocols. Why wasn't this, reported from the get-go and properly handled? And I believe this teacher in particular has a lawsuit against the DOE, and she did return back into the classroom, but there's, a shift in that school. Now, what came after that was really interesting because the chancellor would go to visit the school and there would be a press conference and kids around the chancellor would be wearing their keffiyehs. And in fact, there was one young girl who took the mic and said a few things and, wrapped up in her keffiyeh. And I couldn't help but think that is that the right thing to do, right? What to me right now, the keffiyeh started to represent the new swastika, right? Does the child know what they're symbolizing is extremely hostile to the Jewish community right now? So that
this is like the really difficult one for like people on the outside looking in, because I think it's been characterized that like the keffiyeh is essentially it's a cultural symbol of Palestinian identity. And the reality is that it comes from southern Iraq and it was appropriated by the PLO in the 1960s, specifically Yasser Arafat. And while he was wearing this keffiyeh, and while many terrorists were actually, and many of the members of the PLO were carrying out terrorist attacks with the keffiyeh on. So like people kind of get, I guess, upset at Jews for saying this, but it's lacking. The people that are saying it to us that like, how could you do that? You're being racist against Palestinians. They're really lacking any historical basis for why we would think this. It's kind of like saying, oh, the Confederate flag's fine because it meant more than just slavery.
Right. Or even to that point, the swastika, right? It brings into this conversation of and thought process of symbolism, right? What is its symbol? And could a symbol, is it possible that parts of that symbol could have started out, parv or, benign and now mutated into something else, right? I mean, when we think of the keffiyeh, to your point, the history is so important to understand that history of the Palestinian pattern keffiyeh, but a keffiyeh itself is really used for protection in the desert, right? For ages, people wore headscarves in the Middle East.
Jews included. We used to have sutra. Yeah.
Right. Very similar.
Which, by the way, was banned by the Muslim majority, the Muslim colonizers, because they wanted to be able to identify Jews by not having the sutra. Yeah.
Right. So again, history plays an extremely important part in this, accurate history. And what we're seeing is this mutation, right? This twist. So anyway, after the chancellor's press conference, the silver lining to this is that it brought strong Jewish voices in the K through 12 space together. And right away, I realized that I needed to find a way to create a platform of teachers, parents, students, and allies coming together. Because there were some parent groups already being formed, especially in the private school world that I've been part of for a couple of years prior. in regards to Jewish affinity groups, only because it didn't. I was involved in them because they didn't exist in the public school world at this time, and even prior to October 7th, I was trying to create a platform to discuss the K through 12 issues. But after October 7th, and definitely after Hillcrest, it prompted myself and 3 other educators to come together and to go to the steps of Tweed, Boss Tweed, or the Tweed building is where the chancellor's office is, and to have a press conference and call out the anti-Semitism in the schools and to raise awareness. And we quickly created a platform.
Is this the birth of your organization?
This is the birth of the New York City Public School Alliance. And we created this platform, and we were very, very, diligent in making sure that this was a platform where we could have the teachers and the parents and families come together to speak about the incidents and really understand what was happening in our schools from both ends, right? Because parents see something and teachers see something, but it was important to have this dialogue going. And we quickly grew from 4 people to 30 people to over 2,500 concerned stakeholders. And right away, I realized that, this is a great platform. People are seeking support. It is so needed for the time, but we also need to create a documentation system. And we very efficiently created a form that could document not only incidents of verbal, physical, and graffiti, Jew hate, and anti-Semitism, harassment in the schools, but also a document that we could log problematic materials. Curriculum, lessons, workshops, screenshots, professional development, and the incident started
So all this stuff that you talk about, you have all the evidence, right?
I have all the evidence. I am the gatekeeper of this evidence. Yeah, it's crazy. And it was like all of last year was like burning holes in my computer, right? It needed to get out and be heard. So I'll tell you how we were able to get it out. But the incident started to flood in. I mean, really flood in from the month of November to the end of from the end of November to June. We collected over 8,000 pieces of evidence. Year to date, we're over 10,000 pieces of evidence. Wow. And I realized that we needed to do something with all of this, right? And by the way, the first step in advocating for Jewish civil rights in the schools and protections, we went straight to leadership. We went to Banks, David Banks, the chancellor. We went to the New York City public school leadership. We went to the mayor. We went to Jewish legacy orgs. We went to whoever would listen, politicians. And we literally handed over a good chunk of evidence at the beginning. And we were hopeful that the DOE leadership in New York would take it seriously. And we had great meetings, and we walked away feeling great. And we're like, wow, we're really going to make a difference. And unfortunately, we quickly learned that it was more of appeasement meetings rather than taking us seriously. There were certain aspects that they listened. For example, we had a really great meeting with the head of security of the schools, Mark Rampersant, and he listened to us and was very sympathetic. And we explained how incidents weren't being reported well, and there was, teachers didn't know how to define certain forms of anti-Semitism and how it was mutating, and we need this definition. I want to give a shout out to Mayor Adams for adopting IRA and creating an executive order for IRA to be used. I think that's going to be very helpful.
Really important enforcement mechanism to be able to define discrimination in the ways that we're seeing it in its modern form against Jews. So that way, you at least can punish people or deter people from this bad acting.
100%. But now we have to train administrators and school staff on how to use IRA, right? And this mutation of anti-Semitism. And during this time period, we would push for, workshops on anti-Semitism. And they did listen to the Jewish community and implement some workshops. But whatever workshops they implemented didn't address the elephant in the room. It didn't address the mutation of anti-Semitism. It didn't address, what was happening in New York City streets, and this anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and this, I describe it as this jihadi ideology, cultural Marxist jihadist ideology that was, really kind of melting together and hitting our K through 12 space. So at first we did have good meetings that we felt that, it's very possible we could see progress. But whatever they implemented, whatever suggestions they took from us, the implementation of it was wrong. For example, there was a push to have an anti-Semitism workshop for educators, and they outsourced an organization called Building Bridges, and the head of that organization is Debbie Alamatazer, who, in 2005 was known as New York City Intifada principal, because she ran a school and had her staff wear New York City Intifada t-shirts. And Debbie Alamatazer is, in the New York political space. And she's very well connected to CARE and teaching while Muslim and pushing for, radical ideologies. And her organization is teaching about anti-Semitism. Right. And so it was just, it was Wacky Wednesday every day. So to get back to the documentation system, we collected so much evidence, and what we did was we outsourced a nonpartisan organization that assesses threats to America. And I said to the NCRI team, Network Contagion Research Institute, who are amazing. I mean, these guys, this team, I take my hat off to them. I asked them, is it possible to create an algorithm that could read curriculum like a student and determine the bias in the curriculum, right? I knew what I saw. I knew how to pull out, from the Brown's Choices worksheet that so many high schoolers were given to learn about Israel, and use this, worksheet in class. And the first sentence of that worksheet, it comes from Brown University. So everyone thinks it's, high academic rigor. You and I know that Brown's Choices is one of the most anti-Israel biased curriculums out there. But it's worded in such a false high level academic way that it's very hard to define why it's a problem, right? So one worksheet in
they have like these, like, it's like the I hate to put it this way, but it's just the easiest way. It's like the woke buzzword word salad. Like, yeah, it sounds high and intellectual, but it's really a bunch of like critical theory based terms around power and privilege.
100%. And, or I like to say it's hate wrapped up as social justice, right? So, and packaged beautifully. I mean, really. So, for example, one workshop in particular that many high school classes use, even currently, is a brief history of Israel. And on this worksheet, it's a black and white map of Israel. And the first sentence begins with, in 1948, Israel was carved out of Palestinian land, period. So what does that say to the student, right? The young mind who doesn't really know Israel history or Jewish history dating back thousands of years, right? It says, wow, in 1948, these Jews stole Palestinian land, right? So we were collecting all of this problematic materials, workshops that were run by.
This is like, one second. This is like really difficult because we really just want a balanced view. Like, if we were to have in the classroom a view of the Nakba, as it's put by the Palestinian side, as this was ethnic cleansing of the land and this was our land, but also to have the alternative perspective and to have sourced and cited history around why those competing perspectives can be valid or invalid against each other, that would be totally fine. And that's what they pretend to do. But then when you see the curriculum, it's literally just that.
Right. I think what you said is important. That's what they pretend to do, right? I like to describe it as, once in a while, you'll see like a small bone thrown, to say, oh, look, we mentioned the Jews, or we mentioned one, accurate fact, but it's wrapped up in a twisted version, right? Or a one-sided version that, the Palestinians or I guess modern day society has been raised on, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, this instance, I think most Jewish people and Israeli people would admit that there were expulsions during the 48 war. But also, the Arab leaders encouraged many of the Arabs living on the land to leave in the promise that they would wipe the Jews off the map and they would be able to come back. There's also like nuanced other situations of why people left. So, like, this is just
There's a
what's
war
being taught.
happening. There was a war happening, right? What happens during war? What happens
Horrible
after
things.
war, right? And we know that with Israel becoming an independent state in 1948, it was an end the Arab question and the creation of UNRWA. That in itself was unprecedented in the time of any other type of war, ended conflict or country. So, right from the get-go, Israel was treated differently, and Jews were Jewish history was looked at differently. So
I like to just put it this way, like, basically UNRWA guaranteed refugees from the 48 war the right to return.
Right to return. Yeah.
And, my ancestors, I'm the descendant of two Armenian genocide survivors from a town called Tadim in Turkey. And there's no right for Armenian return to Turkey. And that's true of like tens of other conflicts and hundreds of millions of other people, especially around the World War II and post-World War II era.
Right. 100%. 100%. And
it's not good. It's not like something that we love, but this is a reality of the world, of the modern nation state, of sovereignty of those states. And for some reason, there's a Palestinian exception.
yeah, I will, with that, you just reminded me, through our collection, we were contacted by a school nurse, and the school nurse, from a downtown public school in Manhattan. It was the Spruce School complex. There's a few schools in that school, and the school nurse contacted me last year and said, and she was shaken, and she said that a second grader came up to her for a Band-Aid, and she saw. The second grader saw the map of Israel on her desk. She's a Jewish school nurse, and it was something, I stand with Israel, or something. And the child, the second grader, said, "Oh, I know what that is. That's Palestine." And the school nurse was shocked by it, and she said, "What do you mean? This is Israel, and Palestinians are there. There's Palestine, there's Israel." Whatever she said. And the child said, "We just read a book about Palestine in class." And apparently the teachers sat the kids around on the carpet and read this book about a child who is a Palestinian refugee. And there was no mention of Israel in this book. And the book basically was the story of how her grandfather was ripped out of his home by evil soldiers, the IDF, and they stole his home, and he had to, run for his life. And he took 3 watermelon seeds with him because he used to have a beautiful watermelon farm in Palestine. And they put him in a refugee camp, and he planted the seeds and started growing his watermelon there again. But he always dreams of returning back to his home in Palestine. And the second grader is sharing this story with the nurse. And after the nurse contacted me, I said, "Do me a favor, after the school day, run upstairs, see if you could get into the classroom. Take a picture of the school library. I need to, see what type of books are being offered." And sure enough, and we have all the evidence, she took a picture of the school's bookcase, which this was in May that I was contacted. It was May of last year, in May of 2024. And the bookcase, it was featured in the classroom. And it was right after Arab American Heritage Month, but they were still reading books from the bookcase. And the whole bookcase was children books, like P for Palestine, and all these problematic books that are indoctrinating kids at such a young age with this one-sided bias, right? Planting, not the watermelon seed, but planting the seed of hate. And it's very scary. It's very scary.
This is historical erasure in a lot of ways, right? It's just, and all we're asking for is institutional neutrality to show both sides. If we have a balanced view, it's not wrong to tell the story of a family who was expelled from their home in the context of a war that nobody wants to happen, but to not give the context is disingenuous to everybody involved.
Right. And I think this fight that, that we've been, having with trying to get, our education system, our leadership, to hear us is, we don't want special treatment. We want equal treatment, right? We want the opportunity for historical accuracy, number one, for recognition, for safety, We want the same treatment. And that's, a continued fight. But I do want to just, highlight how NCRI was able to, help us expose, all of what was happening in the system. So we worked with NCRI for many months, and they were able to create different algorithms to read different parts of our evidence. Like I said, we had hundreds of hours of videos and testimonies and screenshots, and DOE recommended curriculum, teacher lessons that were designed, that were really just appalling and heartbreaking. And then, of course, we had tons of information from outside agitators like Teaching While Muslim, Rethinking Schools, Teach Palestine, that would host these free webinars and Zooms for DOE, New York City DOE teachers, and also national teachers throughout the whole nation. I would often attend these Zooms, and I would see 500 people at a time on some of them.
So what did what did they do? How did they help?
So NCRI created a report for us, a scientific data-based report, and not just one of anecdotals, but there's a science behind it. And in that report, I'm going to highlight a few key findings, and there were many. Number one, there is a massive amount of anti-Israel bias in the New York City public schools, a massive amount of anti-Semitism. There's a massive amount of anti-American bias. And another interesting part was, based on the information and the evidence we gave them, there is a major pro-Islam focus in the New York City public schools. Now, that would be great if there was a major focus on all religions, all cultures, all communities, right? But what's concerning is, with this pro-Islam focus, is that many times when discussing the Islamic caliphates, or the term jihad, or even the term Sharia, it is framed in a positive light through educational resources and teachings and workshops. Example, there was a workshop last February put on by the New York City Public School DOE, their FACE department, Family Engagement and Community Division, right? That's one of the tiers in their leadership. And it was a 3-part Zoom program, one on anti-Semitism, one on Islamophobia, and one on racism. And the Islamophobia, for that presentation, okay, they had NYU's Muslim Student Union facilitate this DOE presentation, and their resources were tied to CARE and
Council for American Islamic Relations, yes.
Correct. Who we know have ties to Muslim Brotherhood, and hopefully there's talk to designate them domestic terrorist organization, and hopefully that does happen. They should be already, but their reach is far and wide and deep in really every part of our society. So this workshop in particular, there was a part of it that the facilitator explained Sharia and explain Sharia law. And I have videotapes, of course, of everything, recordings. Sharia law as the strictest form of, practice, but not talking about, the lack of women's rights or the stoning and raping and the fact that women are property and all the, scary and non-democratic stuff that comes from Sharia. But it just really washed over anything negative and framed it as just like a level of observance. And then they went into jihad, and they defined jihad as literally my struggle, which we know jihad, the word jihad, term jihad, means my struggle. So does Mein Kampf, by the way. But but in that explanation, the facilitator offers many different uses of how to use jihad in a word, in a sentence. For example, she says, my jihad is finding time for the gym. My jihad is finding time to spend with my friends. My jihad is, making sure my grades stay up to date. And nowhere in this presentation was even an acknowledgement of, unfortunately, we know that, their jihad has turned into a different meaning under radical Islam or radicals who use it or, as a weapon, right? She didn't even
literally global jihad against the infidel. Like, yeah.
Right. I mean, there was nothing. It was like, holy moly. And I'm watching this and recording it at the same time saying, this can't be New York City. This can't be our educational system that,
So this is like total whitewashing. And meanwhile, the same organization was just, there was a Supreme Court case in Maryland about recusing your children from class where there's mention of homosexual or gender nonconforming characters in books. And CARE supported the ability for parents to recuse their kids from class. So it's this, they're like ingraining themselves into the DEI construct, but then at the same time, the actual fundamentalist part of it, they're going to support things that are anti that DEI construct. So it's really this like they're playing a game here, and people are letting it happen under their nose.
I couldn't agree more. We're being duped. Our society is being duped. And I want to connect it. I mean, there's so much to talk to you about, Josh, because I want to get back to the other findings of this.
I know we only have a little bit of time. We might have to do a part two.
I think we might have to do a part two because I actually have a lot more to share. So just before we say goodbye today, I do want to just highlight the other findings. But even right now, to your point, right? Like you have this case that CARE just backed and won, and let's pivot a little bit to what's happening in New York City with the mayor and this
Zohrab Mamdani,
unprecedented victory of Mamdani, who is, I feel masking himself as a, democratic socialist because it sounds easier. It sounds softer, even though socialism is still really not good because it leads into communism. And I mean, we could debate, aspects.
Well, look, our Democratic Socialist alderman in Chicago, Rossana Rodriguez, Siccho Lopez, they are lackeys of Mayor Brandon Johnson, and they are the most anti-Semitic in the council. So it's no mistake.
No mistake. No, it's a well thought out plan. And they're advancing. It's a chess game. But so Mamdani, I don't think he's a socialist. I mean, I definitely can debate communist, but he's a jihadist, right? And in Islam there is, and I'm not an expert, but there is this idea that in this radical ideology that you can mask yourself as aligning or conforming with the other if it has a means to an end. And I feel, to your point, right, in the respects to the CARE victory in this court case, that is, right, they're framing themselves as these DEI supporters, but yet, they're duping us. And the same, I feel, it goes for what is happening with this, Mandani, right? He's framing himself and walking in the Pride Parade as a supporter, but is he duping us, right? I mean, does he really support the LGBTQ community and homosexuality? I don't know. My gut says we're being duped. But
yeah, well, the organized pieces of Islam that he's associated with in the past do not. So if that says something to you, but we
CARE is
yeah.
backing him and is giving him tons of money. So again, that's actually the connecting piece that I wanted to highlight, right? So just to get back to NCRI, the other parts of the report. So they were able to assess the bias. And then they were also able, based on so many of the incident reports that students and teachers sent to me, able to see that principals and school leadership were not following proper protocols when reporting anti-Semitism. So earlier I told you about, when a teacher or a student reports a incident of discrimination, there's a very important question on that incident report, and it says, is this incident a bias incident? Yes or no. And 99.9% of the times when it dealt with Jew hate and anti-Semitism, it was checked off as no. Example, I have a student that I'm helping guide through the system, who's for the last 2 school years has felt extremely isolated, alienated, victimized, terrorized, all the, things that we don't want any student to feel, because he's Jewish, and literally has been called multiple times a dirty Jew, has reported this to his administration, has filled out the incident report. So-and-so called me a dirty Jew for 3 days in a row, or whatever, his summary says, and was filed by the dean as a non-bias incident. So again, when those incidents are filed as non-bias, they stay on school level and they get swept under the rug. And if that dean checked off yes, then it would have gone at least to the higher level, Mark Rampersant, who I mentioned earlier. Now, the DOE says, when we go to them at the leadership, they say, well, if no one's reporting it, what could we do? Right? So there's no accountability happening. So we've been fighting really, really hard, advocating for better protocols, accountability, reforms in the system. The last thing that I want to mention, I mean, there are multiple parts of this report, but the last part is that NCRI was literally able to take so many of the educational resources that the New York City DOE recommends on their website as we speak, still there, as well as, outside agitators and haters like Teach Palestine or Within Our Lifetime, Teaching While Muslim, the Zinn Project, Rethinking Schools, the People's Forum, that they're promoting the same educational resources, okay, that are linked to terror-funded organizations. So when this report came out, I said, this is a no-brainer. At least they're going to focus on protocols, and then they're going to weed out the terror-funded organizations. They'll take them off their sites. It's a no-brainer, right? If you could show this money connection to the organizations, to those educational materials directly to Zinn and Rethinking Schools, then how does New York City Public Schools or any school district continue to recommend these organizations, right? But it's been crickets.
Yeah. Well, this goes to, I think, what our next conversation needs to be about, which is like the manipulation of like truth through dynamics of power and manipulation of the youth through these concepts and whatnot. We could talk for hours about this, Karen, but look, 1.1 million students, the largest Jewish student population, I think, probably in the country, probably in the world outside of Israel. And if you call someone a dirty Jew, it's not considered anti-bias. Unbelievable. So, Karen, I just want to thank you so much for everything that you've done and that you continue to do. It is such important work. Although sometimes it feels like probably punching a brick wall. We have your back. We're here to support you. And I think we need to do another conversation. So let's get it set up soon, okay?
I think so. It would be my pleasure to contin and
get me that NCRI report. I want to see it.
I will. I could even send you the videos of the Islamophobic Islamophobia presentations that the DOE hosted. But I do want to say that this work is heavy. And you know this, Josh. It's like a roller coaster. And with that being said, I have hope. I have faith. I know that there are still a ton of good teachers in the system, but that is decreasing. They're either being pushed out or they're being radicalized themselves by being forced in some respects to pull from these radical educational materials, right? So even though not everyone could dissect and define why Brown choices, is a problematic curriculum. And if a teacher chooses to use Brown's curriculum in their classroom and they think it's, the high academic rigor and valued resource, then they're also being brainwashed by this material. So it's like killing two birds with one stone, right? Like you're brainwashing the kids and you're radicalizing yourself, even if you have such good intentions. So we need massive reforms, and the first way that happens is really to pull the layers of the onion and really understand the rot in the system and be able to truthfully assess what needs to be done. So I do have hope. I thank you so much, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you, Karen. Let's peel that onion some more. We'll talk soon.
Definitely. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you like the podcast and wish to support our work, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on our social media channels @Navi Values.